Are you sick of paying $9 for a Dremel branded felt tip? Are you sick of really cheap tips falling apart and leaving fibres all over your opal as you're trying to polish it? Well, today we're going to go through a bit of a solution for you. This is the current felt tip that I'm using now, and I'm finding that the felt tips work really well with cerium, the cerium oxide. So this one's lasted quite some time. It's starting to get a little bit fluffy, and once it gets a little bit fluffy it starts leaving behind a few fibres, which is a little bit annoying. It doesn't do huge damage to your opal or anything, or your polishing quality. It just gets a little bit annoying to see little fibres going all over the shop, and they can start flying off a little bit. But it still works. The problem is that this one's getting pretty worn and it probably won't last a hell of a lot longer. And I just had a look on the website, just on Bunnings, and saw that a Dremel tip, just this little piece of felt on the end, we're not even talking about the mandrel at the bottom, just that felt tip is $9 Australian. $9 for just a tip. Luckily enough, there is a solution, and that is to make your own wooden tips. So this is one that I've just started. In essence, all I'm doing is buying, well, you only need to do this once. So these are screw tip mandrels. So they're just a standard mandrel with a screw tip on the end of it. These cost me $2 each for the pack of 5. So fairly cheap, and this you can use over and over and over again. It's not a consumable. I mean, this is the one that came with my actual rotary tool, and it's gone through all the polishing pads basically. So all you need is that, a piece of sandpaper. So this is just a standard wet dry piece of sandpaper, and some dowel, which I've got some behind me, but I'm not going to fit them on camera because they're 1.2 meters long. And the dowel comes to about $2 to $4 for reasonable sized dowel. That's per meter, and you can get heaps. It depends on how long you want this shaft, this piece of wood, but you can get heaps out of that. So for the price of a single Dremel branded felt polishing tip, you can make yourself an army of these things to last you a lifetime. So basically how to do it is, you want to decide on the length and the width of your dowel. For me, this one is a 8mm, I believe, because it's slightly smaller than a Nova tip. As in slightly narrower. Yeah, you can see there that it's just covering it. I think a Nova tip is about 9 mils, and this dowel is 8. And the length that I've chosen, you can see here what I measured it up against. I just measure it up against one of the Nova tips, and then cut it off. Not very square, but fairly square. So you get yourself a nice little chunk of dowel, and then you want to get this mandrel to get into it. Now here you have to be a little bit careful, because if you do it wrong and you try to screw it in, this is what happens. Because the dowels are so thin and there's not a lot of room on either side, if you just simply try to screw the thing in, you will end up splitting the dowel, which is completely useless. So how you get past this is, you get your piece of dowel, you mark a center point. That doesn't have to be too accurate. The closer you get it to the dead center, the better. So you can also do a little cross across the widest points and see where they intersect, and that can be your middle. And then with that, what I do is I use a small drill bit and drill down to however far you really want. It doesn't really matter. And then you get a larger bit. So this is about 3mm, I think. And you basically want to drill to the same depth as this here, or maybe pull back just short. So the drill bit that you get, the size doesn't really matter as long as you focus on the bit being smaller than the screw. So as long as the bit is just smaller than the screw, then you're giving these edges a little chance to bite into the wood and hold it in place. You've also got to make sure that your screw is actually the thread is heading in the right direction, depending on which way you actually have your rotary tool set up. Some can go in both directions, but if you go in this direction, you'll see here that it's screwing away and out of my fingers. That'll happen with your bits as well. So you'll actually screw the wood off the tip. So you've got to be making sure that it's spinning in the right direction, in which case it's just trying to burrow further into the wood rather than burrowing out. So yeah, basically just get your piece of dowel and then drill your small pilot hole through, and then expand that to the right size to fit your screw tip. And then, yeah, simply screw it on. And if you're happy with that, then you've just got yourself a nice cylindrical piece. The next step is to actually look at it as it's spinning. So just chuck it in your rotary tool and turn it on and watch it spin. You shouldn't see this wobbling too much. If you're seeing it wobble, the outline of this move backwards and forwards somewhere, it means you've either got it crooked or you're out of center. So at that point, you've actually got to chuck it into your Dremel, which I'll do in a minute. We'll just go through the talking part first. You'll chuck it into your Dremel and basically run it alongside your sandpaper. In this case, somehow, with this one, I've managed to hit the dead center. So that just goes to show, if you do it enough times, you will end up nailing that center pretty well. My camera is no way it's going to focus on this. Not on the part that I want. But yeah, I hit pretty much dead center, and so when I turn it on, it actually doesn't do this wobbling thing and create like a blurry end. Because what that'll do is that'll hit up against your opal, and it might only be a tiny bit, but it just means that you're not getting a nice smooth polishing surface and connection. You can see that the end is pretty dodgy, but that's okay because the next step's going to solve that as well. So yeah, if it's not in the dead center, run it up against the sandpaper, make sure it is perfectly even around it. And then you can actually not bother going with a cylinder like this. What I like to do is I like my tip to look basically exactly like the Nova tip. So what you do there is you basically just want to form a point up here. So as you can imagine, you're basically running the Dremel and you're running it up against this sandpaper and you're shaping this just like you would an opal. You're just shaping this piece of wood until you get the right shape. And the sky's the limit really. I can easily turn this into that kind of cone-shaped kind of polishing piece. I can do some really thin, narrow, pointy bits if I really want, something like this. If I get a really big, fat piece of dowel, I can actually get something nice and wide like this. So yeah, the sky is the limit. I personally use a lot of bullet-shaped tips, in which case I want a kind of bullet-shaped tip for polishing as well, which is a little bit annoying because this one is not bullet-shaped, or at least not perfectly bullet-shaped, and I prefer it. Prefer this shape more than any other for polishing and carving any of my pieces. So yeah, that's pretty much it. The other thing is, when it comes to choosing the sandpaper grit, don't go too fine. If you go too fine, you actually end up starting to polish the wood, and whatever grit you're using won't actually be able to house into the wood all that easily. So, especially with cerium oxide, I've found with the wood, you need to keep it fairly rough still. With the diamond paste, it's a little bit less. Unfortunately, I don't have any diamond paste anymore. I was only using that at the start of my opal polishing and carving life. But since then, I've basically been sticking with cerium oxide on felt. But I will be moving to cerium oxide on homemade wood tips, because these things cost next to nothing to make. It takes minutes. You're literally drilling a hole twice and screwing a thing on, and then basically shaping this to whatever you want. If you just want a barrel, this is it. This is it. Finished. I mean, I could square off the end if I really wanted to. But yeah, just a simple barrel shape. This is it. And there you go, you've got yourself a brand new tip. I'll stop talking here and I'll just show some footage of me shaping this into the kind of point that I want. It's going to be a little bit bullet-like, maybe a bit sharper, because I like having an actual point, and a bit more of a flat surface. I find that these are a little bit too curved. But as long as it can get into any groove that this makes on the opal, then it's perfectly fine. But yeah, I'm basically going to turn this into a bit of a point, and yeah, that'll be a fresh polishing bit, and it won't cost me $10. So yeah, hopefully that helps people. Check out the footage following this and you'll see how I shape the tip. But yeah, apart from that, I will see you in the next video.